Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. On Sunday, the curtain will come down on the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, with the torch to be passed to the next host city, Milan in Italy. As Tokyo showed us last year, it's never easy to hold such a huge sporting event during a global pandemic. But the general sentiment is that the Beijing Games haven't really gone as planned, at least as well as the Chinese government had hoped. From grim images of ski venues located in the middle of grey-looking industrial sites, athletes' complaints over their treatment and the food, to accusations of cheating by Chinese skaters, and even, as we just heard, a very high-profile alleged doping scandal. The Beijing Games have been far more underwhelming than the 2008 Games that were held in the same city.
Viewing numbers are also sharply down, with NBC admitting 10 million fewer Americans have been watching than the same stage of the 2018 Olympics in Pyeongchang. That being said, some of the sporting achievements have dazzled, with countries like Germany, Austria, Norway, and Switzerland all scooping lots of medals. For South Korea, though, the medal haul has been relatively low, despite some individual standouts like Hwang Dae-hun and Choi Min-jung in speed skating. For more, we are joined by Yoon So-hyang, a reporter at South Korea's Chungang Daily. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
So firstly, how have you been finding the Olympics, and why do you think fewer people are turning to watch compared to the previous games?
So actually today is day 17 of the 20-day-long Olympics, and we are almost done with 3 more days to go. But for the last 2 weeks, the Olympics for me have been an exciting but an unusual ride for sure. And I think it's almost inevitable to compare it with the Tokyo Games that took place just last summer. And I personally feel that people didn't pay as much attention to the Beijing Games as much as they did for Tokyo. And of course, decreased viewership numbers prove that the Beijing Olympics are on pace to be the least watched Olympics on record. I think there are a few different reasons for that. First, there's usually a breathing period between the Olympic Games, but COVID has changed that paradigm in addition to everything else. The Beijing Olympics were sort of thrown upon us just 6 months after the conclusion of the year-delayed Tokyo Games. So naturally, negative headwinds remained, from the pandemic to a public that disapproves of the politics in China, to a lack of big-named athletic stars heading into the Games, especially with NHL players not participating, to a diplomatic boycott with a not so ideal time window for a large audience focused on the NFL and the Super Bowl in the US. These different reasons combined resulted in significant viewership decline, as you mentioned, and lower interest. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the athletes and their achievement at the Games should also be downplayed. I think that since the Tokyo Games, the interest of Korean Olympics fans have shifted away from the medal count to the process and athleticism. And I also think that the public are channeling that energy to cheer for our athletes regardless of the results. And that's something that is positive for us and the athletes.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who says they've competed in an Olympics, whether they win a medal or not, that's some achievement in itself. But for yourself personally, what would you say have been the highlights and the lowlights thus far at the Beijing Games?
Right. To start off with the sort of darker side of the Olympics, I think that the low light has to be the CAS decision to allow Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva to compete at the Olympics despite a positive doping test. To give you some background, Valieva is a 15-year-old figure skater who quickly became the biggest story of the Olympics after testing positive for banned heart medication in a urine test taken last December. And of course, there were backlash from figure skating fans, coaches, and commentators that this was an unfair decision, even with figure skating legend Kim Yeon-ah posting on her SNS page that athletes with doping problems should not be able to compete. IOC decided that they would not give out medals or hold a medal ceremony for any event that she medals in. And so for the team figure skating event, United States still have not received their silver medals, alongside Japan, who is also waiting for their bronze medals. But to some good news. It has once again been proved that Korea is still a short track powerhouse, with Choi Min-jung's 1500-meter gold in addition to Hwang Dae-han's 1500-meter gold. The short trackers have single-handedly achieved Korea's stated objective of winning 1 to 2 gold medals at the Beijing Games. Well, though it was expected that those medals would most likely be won in short track, that both Choi Min-jung and Hwang Dae-han would be able to pull through amidst the crashes and controversies that dominated the early stages of the competition wasn't always a sure thing, which made the 2 gold medals something of a consolation prize for Korea.
Well, So-young, in terms of COVID-19, clearly organizers want to be safe, but do you think, the masks, safety protocols, and venues with barely any spectators actually stripped away much of the passion and magic and excitement of the Olympics?
Right. In our perspective as viewers of the Olympics, sure, it wasn't the most popular Olympics for different reasons that we've already covered, including that it was during a worldwide pandemic. But I think the more important take here should be how it was for the Olympians who had to compete in something they had prepared for 4 whole years without any friends and family in the stands, but more importantly, amidst the anxiety that they might not be able to compete if they were to test positive for COVID at any time during the Olympics. And it did happen a couple of times, unfortunately. Most recently, US figure skater and medal hopeful Vincent Zhou tested positive for COVID, costing him the chance to compete in the men's singles figure skating entirely. So for Olympians, masks and frequent COVID testings were, of course, not part of something that they were used to, but that doesn't mean those measures weren't necessary, because they were. But after covering the Olympics for the last 2 weeks, I think that the biggest throw off for them was the possibility of catching COVID and being stripped of their once in a lifetime chance to compete at the Olympics. And to have overcome that anxiety and finish their race on or off the podium, I think is itself an achievement that should be celebrated.
All right. That was Yoon So-hyang, reporter of the Chungang Daily. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.